Hello and welcome to another episode of Soul Talk Radio. And my microphone was not in front of me, so I'm going to try that again since these are recorded. Hello and welcome to another episode of Soul Talk Radio. So today's episode, we're going to be talking about neurodivergent versus neurotypical. This topic came up this week for me a couple of times, and so I thought it would be nice to just chat about it. Excuse me. So we live in what's called like a neurotypical world, right? Like most people fall under that neurotypical umbrella. But then there's also what's called neurodivergent, which would be like a non-medical umbrella term that describes people who have variations in mental functions. So that umbrella could include like the autism spectrum disorder or ADHD, that sort of stuff. And in the past, especially the past few months, as well as the past year, I'd say, I sometimes feel like I align with certain symptoms of ADHD, possibly a little bit of autism, also CPTSD, which I'll discuss in a moment. And so I just start to question, like, am I ADHD? I don't know. I do align with a lot of the symptoms, and so I wanted to talk about that. I feel like a lot of people have that same experience. For example, I was at a girlfriend's house this weekend, and me, along with 5 other women, were just sitting there chatting, and the topic of neurodivergent came up. And one of the girls said, I believe I'm neurodivergent. And then I was like, me too sometimes. And then another girl was like, me too. And another girl was like, me too. So it's 4 women out of 6 women who are like, I feel like I could possibly be on the spectrum or underneath the neurotypical umbrella sometimes, but we've never gotten an official diagnosis. I will say that I have been diagnosed with complex PTSD, so CPTSD, and I know that some of the symptoms from CPTSD overlap into autism and ADHD. Same thing with the symptoms from ADHD and autism, they a lot of times overlap. So it could just be CPTSD, but I wanted to talk about it. And I find that this is a really cool and interesting topic to me. So more people than ever are having late diagnosis for neurodivergence. And I've heard people online commenting on it saying that with more people than ever being diagnosed, that they're lying. There can't possibly be that many people who have it. And I'm like, I don't think that that's true. I think that nobody would fake a diagnosis like that, first of all. But I think that there's more resources than ever for us to help better understand ourselves and therefore seek out help when we notice that we align with certain symptoms that other people have and get a diagnosis that we didn't even know that we needed. So I wanted to read some of the symptoms for all 3 of those, for ADHD, autism, and CPTSD, and then talk about it a little bit more because, again, I feel like so many people align with some of these things. So I found this first list. I'll do ADHD first. I found on verywellmind.com. So here are some of the symptoms of ADHD. There are, bear with me. So it says, in relationships, you may wish that you were able to be a better friend, partner, or mom, or that you could do the things that other people do. For example, you may wish you could remember birthdays, bake cookies, or arrive on time for a date. Absolutely. It's because a lot of times with ADHD, you have problems with memory. And I definitely align with some of those symptoms. For example, if I don't write something down, a lot of times I do not remember that it's happening. Doctor's appointments, just appointments in general. If I don't write it down, if I don't keep it in my calendar and put a alarm to when it's happening, I'll forget about it. I don't want to read a lot of this because a lot of it's paragraphs going into it. I wanted to find the actual list of just like symptoms. So give me a second. Okay, so some of the symptoms of ADHD, it says, is overspending. I don't align with that one. Disorganization, I will say when I was younger, for sure, a little bit disorganized, but now I make it a point, and I've talked about this before, I've organized almost my whole life because I have to be organized in order for things to run smoothly, including my home. And it says relaxing is often difficult for people with ADHD, and little things can push you over the top and may become emotional sometimes, yeah. It says ADHD can also have substance abuse disorders such as addictions, alcoholism, or drugs. They can also have anxiety disorders such as social anxiety disorder or obsessive compulsive disorder. They can have sleep disorders. They can have eating disorders, as well as mood disorders such as experiencing depression or bipolar disorder. So I do align with the anxiety disorder. I mean, I used to experience like heavy anxiety. I used to experience panic attacks years ago. Between like 2009 and 2013. So yeah, I mean, let me go on. So this other one I found at mayoclinic.org. These are again symptoms of ADHD in adults. So impulsiveness, disorganization, and problems prioritizing, poor time management skills. Yes, if I'm not organized. Problems focusing on a task at times. Yeah, I lack. It's not that I lack motivation because I feel like I'm a very motivated person. It's like I lack, I don't know, it's hard to describe. It's like sometimes I just can't get started on a task that I know I need to do. So honestly, one thing that I started doing is I started time blocking my day. Like right when I get off work, because like I said, I still work a full-time job at 3 p.m. Or excuse me, my brain was working too fast for me there and I didn't say what I was said it too quickly. I work a full-time job. I get off at 3 p.m. So right at 3 p.m. to like 4 p.m., I time block an hour to work on my business. And then, for example, from 4 to 5, I'll work on something else. And then from 5 to 6, I'll work on something else. But I'll set an alarm for an hour and I'll dedicate to focusing on, the stuff for my business during that hour. And that has been really helpful as far as with time management. Trouble multitasking. Excessive activity or restlessness, poor planning, low frustration tolerance, sometimes frequent mood swings, problems following through and completing tasks, a hot temper, trouble coping with stress at times, especially in the past. I mean, like I said, I used to experience panic attacks until I found meditation, mindfulness, breath work, which is what saved me from experiencing those panic attacks. I would say that I did have issues coping with stress and anxiety, absolutely. So this is more on ADHD, performance at work and school, forgetting appointments, always running late for meetings, constantly being behind on deadlines, daydreaming. I do daydream sometimes, especially when I was little. I remember doing that a lot. Messy and disorganized workstation. No. When I was younger, yeah, not anymore. Unable to work in a noisy or busy environment. Yes, this is another reason why I sometimes wonder if I'm under that neurodivergent umbrella, because I have sensory stuff sometimes. Like I get sensory overload for sure. Noises, light, sounds, just the energy of people being in a really high energy place for too long, it just gets overwhelming and I want to leave. And if there's too many lights on me, if there's too much noise, but especially being unable to work in a noisy or busy environment, I absolutely do experience that. So then it goes into impact on relationships. Sometimes zoning out during a conversation, causing the other party to feel ignored. I have, unfortunately, done that from time to time. Can't remember important dates. Yes, if I don't write stuff down, it is gone. And I've seen a video of somebody with ADHD talking about how they feel bad because sometimes they will forget birthdays of very important people in their life, and then those people are hurt and they'll go into like, I didn't mean to forget you. It's not because I don't care about you or lack of love for you. That has nothing to do with it. It's just my brain didn't seem to retain that information. So again, I do find it very helpful to write those things down on a calendar, put a reminder, that sort of thing. Unintentionally blurting out statements that hurt the other party, forgetting to do things as promised or agreed to, difficulty controlling your emotions or losing your temper. Challenging social interactions, so going on a tangent when speaking. Yes. Trouble focusing on the conversation unless the topic really interests you. Sometimes, I mean, not always. Lower self esteem, making it harder to talk to new people. Definitely when I was younger. Very shy. Disliking putting yourself out there or making new friends. I wouldn't say so. No, maybe when I was younger. Can't seem to pick up on social cues or read body language. No, that's not me at all. I can read people like a book, to the point where I feel like I'm reading people's minds sometimes. Okay, this is still ADHD stuff. So neglecting physical pain. You may neglect exercising. Your diet may lack the right balance of nutrients. You may forget to take your medication. You may miss health checkups and doctor's appointments. Okay, I want to go into the symptoms for autism now. Oh, another thing that I was reading when I was researching all of this is that 20 to 50% of children with ADHD most likely have a parent with ADHD, and a lot of them have an undiagnosed parent with ADHD. And another thing that I found really interesting is that ADHD presents differently sometimes in women and in men. What I was reading was that ADHD in men a lot of times is detected very quickly in childhood because they have an overactivity of the body, right? But a lot of times in women, it's not detected until they reach puberty, or into adulthood, because a lot of times the overactivity is of our minds in women. So I thought that was really interesting. Okay, so I want to go into the symptoms of autism. So this is from Psychology Today. They have social difficulties. This is, again, one of the reasons why I sometimes wonder if I'm on the spectrum or under that umbrella, because I do feel like I'm very intelligent and I love the way my mind works, but sometimes I am awkward in social situations and I don't know why. And I'll leave that situation like, why are you this way? Why? You know what I mean? And yeah, so I do have issues with that. So this number one thing listed here is social difficulties. And it goes on to say women with autism often find it difficult to read or respond to social cues. I don't know, maybe. Some women navigate this difficulty by creating a social checklist and learning how to respond to people in socially appropriate ways. Okay, so this goes into talking about masking. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that, but people who are on the spectrum a lot of times do something called masking, where they're like, you know, looking at how they're kind of like looking at how people respond, noting it, and then purposely responding that way, moving forward in a way that wouldn't be normally natural to them, but they're just doing it in order to fit in, right? They're masking their true self, their true natural kind of expression, and expressing themselves in a way that they know is more socially acceptable, unfortunately. And so they have sensory sensitivity. I definitely experienced that. Sorry, I'm reading through some of this stuff and I don't think it's important to bring up. They have a heightened sense of awareness when it comes to smell, light, sound, and touch. Yes. And also on the topic of touch, sometimes I feel like certain fabrics really bother me. Or like when my tag is touching me, no thank you. I have to cut the tag out of almost all of my clothes. And then it goes into somebody with autism might have just a matter of not liking certain things. For example, textures or certain types of food, that sort of stuff. They have executive dysfunction, which is it can be hard to organize themselves, finish tasks, and maintain emotional control. Again, the organizing themselves, finishing tasks, that aligns with the symptoms of ADHD. That's what I mean when I say that a lot of these symptoms kind of overlap. Obsessive interest, that can also align with ADHD. Both men and women with autism tend to have specialized and intense interests. Absolutely. Sometimes I'll get like hyper-focused on a new hobby or interest, and I know that a lot of people experience that. Oh my gosh, I have like a closet that's organized of all of the hobbies that I've picked up over the years. Like, and don't get me wrong, I still love doing them, but I get like hyper fixated on them at first and then purchase all the stuff for them, like painting, sketching, crochet, playing the guitar, most recently playing the piano, trying to think of all the stuff, like picture all the stuff in that closet. But anyways, yeah, I do get hyper focused on things that interest me. It goes into talking about camouflaging, which is the same thing as masking, which I just talked about. Sometimes they have sleep issues. It says that many women with autism experience difficulty sleeping, which is caused by sensory issues. Sometimes they have difficulty with eye contact. Eye contact can be extremely challenging for people with autism. So, to touch on this, I do feel like I align with this sometimes as well. I love making eye contact with people and that I'm listening and that I'm there and present with them. But sometimes when I'm making eye contact with them, and this happened on Friday, and looking into their eyes as they're speaking, and all of a sudden I'll see them like look away a lot, and then I'll get, my mind will say things like, oh, am I staring at them too much? Like, do I need to look away more? And I find myself yeah, I find it interesting that I also align with that. Sometimes they have difficulty with emotion regulation. They called stimming, which is a repetitive behavior, and it could be like rocking or hand flapping, repetition of words or phrases, rocking or spinning. It could be picking or rubbing or twirling of hair. And a lot of times I've heard this being referred to as them self-soothing. It's like a way for them to self-soothe, And sometimes I do that. Like sometimes I'll find myself, if I'm a little bit anxious, like twirling my hair, or I'll like before I go to bed sometimes I've noticed that I'll start to like rub my feet together, and I've heard that being referred to as a form of stimming, like a form of kind of self-soothing right before I go to bed, which is interesting. And then also it goes into sometimes people with autism also experience anxiety and depression. So, sorry, let me read through a few more of these things. I got them from a few different websites, so some of the things are overlapping and I don't want to repeat them twice. Sometimes they have an inability to express emotions or recognize them in others. I wouldn't say that I align with that. Again, I feel like I read people really well. So sometimes they have trouble recognizing social cues, any inability to predict someone's response or reaction. They can develop routines or rituals that cannot be disrupted. Becoming extremely fascinated with one particular subject. Oh yes, I freaking love learning. And I'll become kind of obsessed sometimes about learning about different things. Oh, and then also during my research, I noticed that it said 30 to 61% of people with autism are also affected by symptoms of ADHD. So I'll hear people online refer to themselves as autism, and what they're kind of combining the two things, like ADHD and autism, into one little combined word of autism. I've heard it referred to in other ways as well, but that's what they're referring to. They're saying that they have autism and ADHD, which apparently is very common for those two things to coexist. Okay, then I want to go into the symptoms of CPTSD. So this is a little bit different than PTSD. It's CPTSD, complex PTSD. So at times they will avoid situations that reminds them of their trauma. They may experience dizziness or nausea. They may be in a continued state of high alert. They may lose trust in self or others. They may have difficulty sleeping or concentrating. I would say the difficulty sleeping thing I absolutely experienced more years ago. I wouldn't say I have issues with that now. But also for people with complex PTSD, they can experience negative self-view, absolutely, especially years ago. I did not love myself. I struggled with that a lot. But I would say I've done so much healing in the past few years that I do love myself now, and I try and practice self-love all the time. So they also have change in beliefs or worldview, a lot of times, sometimes negative because of the things that have happened in their past. They can have emotion regulation difficulties. They can experience relationship issues due to trust, as well as just their interactions, and possibly having a negative self-view or assuming that the person's going to leave, that sort of thing. And then it goes into talking about sometimes having preoccupation with an abuser. It's not uncommon to fixate on the abuser, the relationship with the abuser, or getting revenge for their abuse. I wouldn't agree on that for me. But yeah, so those were all the symptoms of ADHD, autism, and CPTSD. So you can see after reading those that a lot of those symptoms align with each other, which I find really interesting. And that's why I think a lot of us, when we hear these things, we're like, okay, am I on the spectrum? And what am I experiencing? That sort of stuff. I think about that all the time, and I wonder. So I also read that it's estimated that 20% of the world's population is under that neurodivergent umbrella. But honestly, I think it's a lot higher than that. I think that people just aren't diagnosed. And I think that they're kind of looking for it more in childhood. You know, they're expecting those symptoms to be more prevalent in childhood to be able to diagnose people. But I don't think that a lot of times they are, especially what I read a little bit earlier about symptoms of ADHD in women presenting a lot of times after they've hit puberty or into adulthood. So I think that once we reach adulthood, the doctors that were possibly, I mean, this isn't the case with all doctors, but possibly doctors are assuming like, okay, well, they would have received that diagnosis already if they're now into adulthood. So it may just be something that they're not even thinking about, and something that we have to bring up with them and say, listen, I'm experiencing these different symptoms, and what could this possibly be? So one thing that I wanted to just quickly touch on when I discuss this topic is it pisses me off, quite frankly, when I discuss this topic with certain people, because the second you say autistic with some people, I feel like they interpret that as the person being unintelligent. And it pisses me off because it couldn't be further from the truth. Some of the smartest people that I've ever known are on the spectrum. And they're such complex thinkers, and they're geniuses in certain regards. And one of my best friends is on the spectrum, and she is one of the smartest women that I know, and I respect her, and I love her, and I love talking to her, and I love just like interacting with her mind and listening to all of the wonderful things she has to say. The only way that you know she's on the spectrum is because of social stuff. Sometimes she'll have like, you know, be a little bit awkward around people, or not quite know what to say, or become silent or shy, that sort of stuff, and you'll kind of notice it in that. But other than that, she's such a wonderful person, and it pisses me off that these topics are still kind of taboo in a way, and I think a lot of people are ashamed to seek a possible diagnosis because of what other people will think of them if they are diagnosed with one of these things, including ignorant people assuming that it means that these people are unintelligent in some way, and it bothers me. So I just wanted to quickly say that. But if you are experiencing any of the symptoms that I read to you today, I would go to a qualified medical doctor and ask them, you know, try and get a diagnosis. And I also have seen a lot of the people who talk about their, you know, new diagnosis online saying that they had to go to several doctors before they got a diagnosis because, again, I feel like, well, I already said what I was going to say, but if you go to a doctor and they don't give you a diagnosis and you truly do feel like there's something, get a second opinion. You know, there are tons of tests that you can take online, but I wouldn't trust those 100%. That can kind of steer you in the right direction as to whether they think that you have, you know, autism, ADHD, or CPTSD. And they are somewhat helpful. I feel like every time I take one of those tests to determine if I have ADHD, it always says, yes, you have ADHD, or yes, you're neurodivergent. And I'm like, okay. But I've never gotten a diagnosis for that. I've only been diagnosed, like I said, with CPTSD. So hopefully this topic was helpful to you in some way. Like I said, I feel like so many people are questioning whether or not they are under that neurodivergent umbrella because they are experiencing some of these symptoms. So again, if you are, go to a qualified medical professional, try and seek a diagnosis. And if you have any questions or comments, you're welcome to leave us a comment. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe. Again, these episodes are recorded every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and then they're posted to all major podcasting platforms on Monday at 7 a.m. And may you be happy, may you be well, may you be joyous and at ease. And thank you so much for joining me today, and until next week.